going to start today. Daf
Bernard,
Samach Beis.
interrupt. Could we learn for my mother's neshama? It's the yahrzeit tonight.
Absolutely. And Steve's father, right?
It's my father, yes. I just came back from davening, yes.
So
Yeah.
it's Steve's father.
So it's Cheza Bat Moshe.
Cheza Bas Moshe. We're going to learn.
Eliyahu, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Keep going. And Eliyahu ben Yoel.
Eliyahu ben Yoel. Nafshem Tzru B'Tzror HaChaim. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going to learn something, a topic today that's going to cover the whole daf. And that topic is like this. Let's just see the pasuk. It's very simple. The Torah talks about Ish Mebeis Yisrael. We know that if you have a carbon, let's say you designated a carbon oil, you want to make a gift of a carbon oil. So the din is you have to bring it into the Mishkan or the Beis Hamikdash to shecht it there. But what happens if a person did not bring it into the Pesach oil moed? The Chumash says, Pesach oil moed lo yaviyoi. If you didn't bring it into the Pesach oil moed, but you shechted it outside the Mishkan, that's called shchutei chutz. That's the topic today. So then the Torah says you didn't bring it for the carbon, you shechted it at home. The nichras ha'ishahu mikarav hamoy. The person that did that will be cut off, will be die young. Now, here's a very interesting point. We could understand that with the regular carbon, but what happens? Let me give you a carbon. Let's say you have a metzora. He's supposed to bring a carbon chatos on Thursday. This Thursday, he's supposed to bring the carbon chatos. That's the end of the time. He has to wait 7 days, and 7th to 8th day, he's bringing the carbon chatos. So let's say he's so excited, and he designates the carbon chatos on Sunday, right? He gives the carbon chatos on Sunday. So what's the din? What's the din if he shechts that carbon chatos on Sunday outside the Beis Hamikdash, outside the Mishkan? Is that considered shchitei chutz? So the answer is no, because you have to be able to, at the same time, have brought that carbon into the Mishkan in order to be chayev for this concept of shchutei chutz, shechting outside. But since it's not in the zman, it's not in the time that you're supposed to bring the carbon, therefore that wouldn't fall under the category of shchutei chutz. Here's another good example, which we're going to discuss today, which is the Sa'ir HaMishtaleach. We know this one of the goats of Yom Kippur, you sent it off the mountain. What happens if somebody shechts that goat outside the Beis Hamikdash? Well, that goat was never supposed to be shechted in the Beis Hamikdash. So therefore, it doesn't fall under the umbrella of shchitei chutz, because the concept is this point. Pesach oil moed lo yaviu. You didn't bring it into the Mishkan. It must be a carbon you could have brought into the Mishkan. So that's the topic of today. So let's begin. Samach Beis on the base, 9 lines from the bottom. Tanu Rabbanan. With that introduction, it's very easy. The Gemara comes nice and easy. Tanu Rabbanan. Rabbis taught Shnei Se'ira Yom Kippur, the two twin goats of Yom Kippur. Sheshachtam bachutz. You shechted it outside the Beis Hamikdash, right? Now, one of those goats are supposed to be shechted in the Beis Hamikdash. One is thrown off the mountain Azazel. So the Mishnah says, the Brisa says, actually, Higra Aleim, before you made the Goyrel to decide, the lottery to decide which goat goes to Hashem and which goat goes to Azazel. So you don't know, but the Brisa says, oddly enough, Chayiv Ashneim. Both of them you chayiv on shchutei chutz. Now, potentially each goat could have been the one that goes to the Azazel. So why you chayiv on both goats? Wait till the Gemara speaks about it in 1 second. But Higra Aleim, if you made the lottery on it and decided which one is going to be brought into the Beis Hamikdash and which is going to be thrown off the Azazel, so then shchutei chutz you'll be chayiv al sheshem only on the animal that was supposed to be brought into the Beis Hamikdash. If you shecht it outside the Beis Hamikdash, the soyel Hashem, then you chayiv shchitei chutz. Upater al she'azazel, but the Azazel goat, if you end up shechting it outside the Beis Hamikdash, it was never supposed to be brought into the Beis Hamikdash, so you put them for shchutei chutz. So the Gemara asks, actually, Higra Aleim chayav al shteim. Before you made the lottery, you chayav on both of them. Lamai chazi. What are these are worthy for? In other words, potentially each one could have been the Azazel. So therefore, and it's not even decided which one is Shem and which one is Azazel. So both of them don't fall onto the category of El Pesach oil moed leheviu, because you haven't decided which one is going to be shechted in the Beis Hamikdash. So why you chayev before they make the lottery on both of them? Rav Chisda answered, Hoil v'ra'u l'so'ir hanasa b'chutz. Both of them potentially could be a carbon of that day on Yom Kippur. Let's take a look. There is, as you know, in Parshas Pinchas, besides what we discussed about the goats that are brought in the service of the day, the Torah says that on Yom Kippur, on the 10th day of Tishrei, don't eat that day. Okay, and then the Torah says for a musaf. This is not the service of the day. This is the musaf. Par echad, ayel echad, 1 cow, 1 ram, 7 sheep for oilus. And then the Torah says, usir izim echad chatas. Bring another goat for a chatas. Milvad chatas kippurim. Besides the goat that you brought for the chatas kippurim, bring one other goat. So this is not a lottery goat. It's just a plain goat that you're supposed to bring for a chatas as part of the musaf service. So both of them, before you made the hagrol of these 2 goats, potentially these could have been the musaf goat. And therefore, if you shechted outside the Beis Hamikdash, you're chayev because of shchutei chutz. So, but because of it's not cannot be called a so'ir that's supposed to be done inside the Beis Hamikdash on the Yom Kippur service because it's missing. You didn't do the lottery. It could only be called the musaf goat potentially. So the Gemara asks, "My shano, what's the difference? L'so'ir hanasa b'fnim. You don't call it the goat of the Yom Kippur service, the loy. It cannot be considered that because the b'chusar garla, because you didn't do the lottery yet. So you can't call this goat a Yom Kippur goat because you didn't do the lottery. But at the end of the day, you can't call it a musaf goat either. L'so'ir hanasa b'chutz nami loy chazi. You can't call it a musaf goat. Why? The mechasri avodas yoyim. Because musaf, let's say, is supposed to be done 2 in the afternoon. You're supposed to first do the goats, the morning goats, the service goats, Yom Kippur goats. And since this is supposed to be brought later on in the day, at this point, when you shechted it, let's say you shechted this azazel, these goats at 9 o'clock in the morning, you can't call it a musaf goat because the musaf goat was supposed to be brought later on in the day after the Yom Kippur service. So why is that not considered? Why does this fall under the umbrella of shchutei chutz? It's not really a musaf goat. Because since potentially it's going to be brought on Yom Kippur, the only thing it's lacking is the time. That's not called the carbon is lacking. And therefore it's called the El Pesach oil moed. You could have brought it. You normally would have had to wait 2 in the afternoon. Fine, but it's still, there's nothing to be done with the carbon itself. And therefore, this goat potentially could have been a musaf goat. But you can't call it a Yom Kippur goat because time wouldn't heal it. You would still need to do a lottery. So therefore, it's not called a Yom Kippur goat. It's potentially could have been called a musaf goat. And therefore, before you make the lottery, you chayev al shneim on both goats. Because potentially each goat could have been the musaf goat that you brought for that day. And therefore, that would make it fall under the umbrella of something you should have brought into the Mishkan and did not. Amar Ravina said, Hashta the Amar Rav Chisda, he just extends another idea. Rav Chisda said, when something is missing something, Mechusa Hagrola, if it's missing to be able to do the lottery, Kim Chusa Masa Dami, it's as if it's what? You didn't do anything with it. In other words, it's missing something to be done with the animal. The fact is, lottery is something done off the animal, but that's considered as if this animal is not ready yet to be brought as a carbon. So it's missing an action to be done on the animal to make it worthy of a carbon. That's what he said. So the same idea would apply like this. Again, let's say a guy has a carbon shlamim. Carbon shlamim, he's supposed to bring it into the Beis Hamikdash to shecht it. So what happens at 4 a.m. when the Beis Hamikdash is closed, right? They close the doors of the Beis Hamikdash at night. He shechts the carbon shlamim. Could he have potentially brought that carbon shlamim into the Beis Hamikdash at that time? No. So therefore, if you shecht it so early, since the doors of the Beis Hamikdash did not open yet, so therefore this carbon is missing an action. This shlamim wouldn't fall under the umbrella of shchutei chutz. That's what he extends it. Hadam Rav Yehuda Mashmuel, Shlamim, a carbon shlamim. He shechted it prior to the opening of the Beis Hamikdash, like 4 a.m. He shechted it, pesulin, it's pasul, but he's not getting the avera of shchitei chutz. Why? He's not getting he's not getting he's not getting it for shchitei chutz. Shenama shachtei pesach oil moed. You have to shecht it for in front of the oil. In other words, like this: if he went into the Beis Hamikdash and actually shechted it while the Beis Hamikdash's doors were closed, so he like snuck in at night and shechted it, it's still pasul because it's closing hours. It's off hours for the Beis Hamikdash. The doors of the Heichal are closed, so it's pasul. And the Torah says that when you shech the carbon, the doors have to be open, not the doors being closed. So you can't shecht it in the Beis Hamikdash at night. So therefore, shachtam bechutz. If you shecht it at night, we go on Daf Samchim Lamed Aleph. Shachtam bechutz. If you shecht it at night, outside the Beis Hamikdash, koydem sheniftechu dalsel heichal, before the Beis Hamikdash was open. So potentially at that time you cannot even bring it into the Beis Hamikdash. Potter, you're potter of shechting outside the Beis Hamikdash. My timer. What's the reason? If something is missing in the opening of the doors, it's it's as if something is missing in the carbon. It's not ra'ui to bring it into Beis Hamikdash, because at the end of the day, at this moment, I could not have brought it into the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore, if I shecht it outside the Beis Hamikdash, I'm potter. So that's all we said over here. Now, so let's just reanalyze. Rav Chizda made a comment. And he said, a very important comment, the 2 goats of Yom Kippur, the 2 twin goats, before you made the goyrel, a guy on Yom Kippur walked out with these 2 goats and shechted it outside the Beis Hamikdash. What's the din? He's chayiv, and he's chayiv koros because shechting carbons outside the Beis Hamikdash. So the Gemara questioned why. Maybe one of them could have been the azazel. The answer is no. We're not. Certainly, they're not considered Yom Kippur goats. But potentially each one of those goats could, we say, since they could have potentially be brought as the Musaf goat, therefore it's subject under the laws of Shchitei Chutz. So the Gemara asks, Umi Islay Rav Chizda Hoyel. Does Rav Chizda hold of this concept? You say Hoyel, which means since. You say potentially, even though it wasn't meant. When you took these twin goats, you meant it that it should be for the Yom Kippur service goats, not for the Musaf goats. But Rav Chizda extends it that potentially could have been used for the Yom Kippur, for the Musaf goats. Does Rav Chizda hold of that idea? Rav Chizda said, look at this case. You have a carbon Pesach, right? And you're supposed to shecht it on Erev Pesach. What happens? You lost it. So you shechted another one to take its place. And then let's say months later, you found the first carbon Pesach, the old carbon Pesach, you found it, the animal. What happens? Pesach, a carbon Pesach. And this is the rest of the year. You shechted it in your backyard, B'shar Yemai Shoshana on the rest of the year, right? It's not Pesach time. So Lishmoy, if you're shechting it, L'shem to carbon Pesach, potter, you're potter from Shchitei Chutz. Why? Because at this moment, let's say you shecht it in Tammuz. At this moment, when you shecht this old carbon Pesach, you could have never brought it into the Beis Hamikdash to be used as a carbon Pesach, because it's not Erev Pesach, it's Tammuz. So you would be potter. But Shaloi Lishmoy, if you shecht the carbon Pesach for the sake of a Shlomim, right? A Pesach could turn into a Shlomim. If you think about it, if you imagine that this is a Shlomim, you could turn a Pesach, an old Pesach, into a Shlomim. So if you shecht it outside L'shem Shlomim, not L'shem Pesach, Chayav because of Shchitei Chutz, because you're shechting a Shlomim outside the Beis Hamikdash. So we darshan, so we imply, it's only because you're thinking about to make it into a Shlomim. But if you did not think about to make it into a Shlomim, L'shmayhu, it's considered a carbon Pesach or potter. So why don't you say the same idea over here? You say that these 2 twin goats, at the end of the day, you bought it for to the sake to use it as a Yom Kippur service lifnim goat, not as a Musaf goat. So same thing, same idea is that as long as you don't think about using it for a Musaf goat, you should be potter for shechting it outside. Ba'amai, the Gemara asked, Lema hoya v'rosh lo l'shmai b'fnim. Why don't you say the same idea as by over here, that since it could be used shaloi l'shmai b'fnim, so the inside. So the Gemara says hachi hashta, you can't compare. Hasam over there by the carbon Pesach, you need to think about to turn it into a shlamim. Boya akira. You need to think about to turn it into a shlamim. Therefore, as long as you don't think about outside the base of Mikdash to turn it into a shlamim, it's not a shlamim. It's an old Pesach. Hi, but this loy boya akira. You don't need to think about to turn it into the carbon musaf chatas because you designated it as a Yom Kippur service chatas. Either it was the carbon chatas that was going to be brought in the Kodesh Kodashim, or it was going to be the carbon chata, or it could be a carbon chatas that's the musaf chatas brought outside the Kodesh Kodashim in the outside Mizbeah. So you don't really need to change it from what it really is. It's both the carbon chatas. That's why over here, Rav Chizda said, you say hoyel. So the Gemara says, Rabba Bashimi Masnilahu B'Darabba. Rabba Bashimi says that Rabba was the one that mentioned this. We're saying that all this time, we started the Gemara and said, Omer Rav Chizda explained hoyel v'royel l'sari nas b'chutz. So his girsa was that it was Rabba who said this. And we asked the question, Omer Rabba, that's what it says, that Rabba talked about Pesach sheshachta b'chutz. So Rabbi Bashim Masnu the Rabbi, our subject person is Rabba, but Tashay the Rabba the Rabba. And we asked the question of Rabba against his own statement. And we answered like we explained before that there's a difference between carbon Pesach and the goats on Yom Kippur. Now, so we're going to discuss this idea. Let's repeat it again. An idea like this: a carbon Pesach that you found, an old carbon Pesach that you found in Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, and you shechted it outside the Beis Hamikdash. The Gemara says b'shar Yemei Shana on the rest of the year, right? On, let's say Rosh Chodesh Tammuz. If you shechted it that you're thinking carbon Pesach, you're potter for shechting something outside because this time you could have not have potentially brought it into the Beis Hamikdash. It's not Erev Pesach. But if you think about Shaloi Lishmoim, it means you're shechting it outside the Beis Hamikdash, but you're shechting it not as because it's a carbon Pesach. You want to turn it into a shlamim. So then, if you shech that into outside the Beis Hamikdash, you sort of turned it into a shlamim that you shechted outside the Beis Hamikdash. Therefore, you're chayav. So l'shmoi is potter, shloi l'shmoi is chayav. Now we have another opinion. Also, Rav Dimi came from Israel. He learned in Israel and he came to Bavel. He said, Omar Rabbi Yirmi, he said in the name of Rabbi Yirmiyah, one of his teachers in Israel, and Omar Rabbi Yochanan, who said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, a completely different concept. Pesach, a carbon Pesach, right? That you shechted it outside the Beis Hamikdash the rest of the year. Again, our example is you shechted your old carbon Pesach that you didn't bring on Erev Pesach, you shechted it in Tammuz. Bein l'shmoi, whether you're thinking Pesach, bein shloi l'shmoi, whether you're thinking to make it into a shlamim, potter, you're potter. Oh, that means even if you think shloi l'shmoi to turn it into a shlamim, you're potter from shchut chutz. So the Gemara clarifies that. Amar Rav Dimi, so Rav Dimi said, I went back to Rabbi Yirmiyah and started asking him this question. It doesn't make sense. I understand why you potter of shchite chutz. If you shecht it for a carbon Pesach, because it's not right now, you can't bring it a carbon Pesach, it's Tammuz. Ella, shaloi l'shmai, but if you're thinking shlamim, amai, hachazile shaloi l'shmai b'fnim. You could turn it, shaloi l'shmai, into a shlamim. If you went into the Beis Hamikdash, you could turn it into a shlamim. So if you shecht it outside the Beis Hamikdash for a shlamim, you should be chayiv shchite chutz. So Rabbi Yirmi answers, Akira's chutz lav shma akira. Turning something into a shlamim outside the Beis Hamikdash doesn't work. In other words, the only way you could turn this old carbon Pesach into a shlamim is if you walk into the Beis Hamikdash and think about shechting it as a shlamim. Then it loses the name Pesach and it becomes a shlamim. But outside the Beis Hamikdash, you can't turn this old carbon Pesach into a shlamim. It always will be called a Pesach, and therefore, whenever you're shechting it, it's a Pesach that could never have been brought into the Beis Hamikdash. So if you shecht it outside the Beis Hamikdash, you are not liable for shechting something outside the Beis Hamikdash. Then we have a third opinion. Also, Pesach sheshachta bechutz b'shar Yemei Shoshana, the Pesach that you shechted outside the Beis Hamikdash the rest of the year. So there he says bein l'shmai, even if you shecht it for a carbon Pesach. Bein shloi l'shmai, even if you shecht it for non-carbon Pesach, chayav. Wait a second, even if you shecht it for a carbon Pesach, how's that possible? Well, I'm going to tell you the answer. What the Gemara is going to say. The Gemara says on Pesach, the rest of the year, it automatically becomes a shlomen. That's what he's going to hold. And therefore, you looked at you think this is an old carbon Pesach. Really, it turned into a shlomen because since you already brought your carbon Pesach, this became a shlomen by itself. And therefore, if you shecht it outside the Beis HaMikdash, you're chayiv. So the Gemara asks, like I told you the answer, even if you shecht it for a carbon Pesach, but now we learned in the Mishnah, Mechus Zman, let's say the carbon's not yet ready. Bein begufay. Let's say the carbon's not yet 8 days old. Now, a carbon cannot be called a carbon unless the animal is old, 8 days old. If someone shechts it outside the Beis HaMikdash on day number 7, you're not liable for shchitei chutz because at that point, this animal could not have been brought into the Beis HaMikdash because it's only a 7-day old animal. Bein babalim. Let's say the owner is not ready. How's that possible that the owner is not ready? This is the example I started off the first example. If a person separated his carbon chatas, but he is not ready to bring that carbon chatas till days later. If he shechts it early, then that doesn't fall under the subject of shchitei chutz. How can you find the bailam not being ready to bring the carbon? Peturim, they're potter. That all these type of people, they have to bring their carbons after a certain time, like a zav 7 day on the 7th day, Yoledis, after Yemei Taihar, which is 40 days later or 80 days later, but Tzoyra is after day 8. If they brought it outside prior to them being ready, Peturim, that doesn't fall under the subject of shchitei chutz. You got to also put a nazir over here because a nazir brings an asham. So there's a girsa here that says nazir. It's very important. But if they bring their oilers and the shlamins outside, chayavim. Why? Because they're always ready to bring a carbon oiler and a carbon shlamim as a present. That can be done. So it can be a gift. And therefore, they would still have to bring their chayiv, but it'd still be a kosher carbon. It would be a kosher carbon if it was sent as a gift into the Beis HaMikdash. So therefore, if they shecht it outside the Beis HaMikdash, their carbon oilers, they would be liable for shchitei chutz. But a chatas cannot revert into a gift. Therefore, if you shecht the chatas too early outside the Beis HaMikdash, you could not have bring that chatas in the Beis HaMikdash, and therefore you're potter. By the carbon asham is only if you shechted the asham, shechting it for an asham. But a carbon asham could turn into a shlamim, a gift. Unlike a chatas, a carbon asham could turn into a gift. So if you shecht it outside the Beis HaMikdash shloi lishmai, you are chayav. So the Gemara says lishmai. The Gemara says, but if you shecht it for its sake, mia potter. If you shecht it for an asham, it's potter. Amai. Why don't you say nema hoya berurin shloi lishmai b'pnim? Why you potter? You could have potentially turned that into a shlamim. So even if you shecht it for an asham outside the Beis HaMikdash, you're potter. So the question is, right over here, the question is, again, by carbon Pesach, you say lishmoi and shloi lishmoi is chayiv. And Rav Tuvia Chilki Bar Tuvia said lishmoi would be potter. How do you differentiate your case of carbon Pesach to the case of Rav Chilki's case by the carbon asham? So the Gemara says, like I told you, a carbon asham, you have to have brains. You have to have a brain power, a kavana to turn this asham into a shlamim. And therefore, as long as you didn't, it always remains a shlamim. Hachi hasha hasam boyakira. You have to turn it into a shlamim. Therefore, by the asham, as long as you didn't turn it into the shlamim, it always remains an asham. And therefore, it wasn't ready, and therefore you'd be potter. Hacha over here, Pesach b'shar Yemais Shana, carbon Pesach that you found all year round, automatically became a shlamim. Automatically became a shlamim. So therefore, even a Pesach, even if you shecht it for carbon Pesach, you're not really shechting a Pesach. You're really shechting a shlamim. Ravashi Masne Chayev Kedam Rinim. Ravashi said that Ravin said that Pesach that you shecht the shloi l'shmoi is chayev. That was his version of what Ravin said. He said that Ravin said that all cases, Lishmoy and Shloi Lishmoy is Potter, because he holds a Karban Pesach that Ravin held, like we said before, that a Karban Pesach does not turn into a Shlomin automatically. You have to turn it into a Shlomin, but it doesn't become a Shlomin. Akira's Chutz, Lav Shmar Akira, turning it into a Shlomin outside the base of Migdash is not called an Akira, and therefore Pligder Reb Chilki Be'Yetuvia, because Reb Chilki Be'Yetuvia says that you could turn something into a different type of animal. You could change the name outside the base of Migdash. That's why Shloi L'Shmoi is Chayev. But Ravin will hold, according to the way Reb Yomi Yoma Daf to learn, that you potter under all circumstances. So I just want to review so you have it clear. The three opinions that you have to know. A Karban Pesach that you shechted it outside the base of Migdash the rest of the year. What is it? So one opinion says if you shecht it for a Karban Pesach outside the base of Migdash, potter. You're not liable for shechting it outside an animal, a Karban outside the base of Migdash, because right now it's not Pesach time. So therefore, you're not chayiv. But if you're thinking outside the base of Migdash, you want to turn it into a shlamim, you would be chayiv. That's Rav Chizda's opinion. Rav Dimi's opinion is that, and same according to one version of Ravin, is that if you shecht it, whether you shecht it as a Karban Pesach, whether you shecht it not as a Karban Pesach, potter, because even thinking that you want to turn this into a shlamim outside the base of Migdash, it still remains always a Pesach, and it's shechting a Pesach at the wrong zman, and therefore it's not subject to laws of shchitei chutz. And Ravin said that even if you shecht it shloi lishmai or shloi lishmai, under all circumstances, shechting a Karban Pesach the rest of the year, you're chayev because of shchitei chutz, because automatically this Karban Pesach, since you brought already a Karban Pesach, this Karban Pesach that you find in summertime is automatically called shlamim, and you're supposed to bring it into the Beis Hamikdash and shecht it there. And if you didn't, and shechted it outside, you chayev under the subject of shchitei chutz.
Baruch, I know this is probably fundamental and most people understand this, but what is the process of shechting outside of the Beis Hamikdash? What do they do with it? Are there mizbeachs? So then what are they doing with the animal once they shecht it someplace else in Israel and not in the Beis Hamikdash?
Well, the Chumash says that as soon as you shecht it, and you didn't bring it, Asher Yishcha, doesn't say Ishish Bebeis Yisrael, that shechts it, this goat, cow, whatever, chutz lamachna, outside the camp, or you didn't right outside the Beis Hamikdash, and you didn't bring it into the Beis Hamikdash. It's like the Reform Jews. So he says, you know what? Why bother bringing it into Beis Hamikdash?
Why in the world would somebody shecht, other than for meat? Why would somebody shecht an animal, theoretically call it a Karban this or a Karban that, when they're not near a mizbeach and they had no ability to do a real Karban? So what would be the purpose?
They call it a Karban at home. That, God accepts your prayer and your shchita and your service anywhere. You don't necessarily, they feel.
So what did they do with it after they shechted it?
Maybe they burnt, let's say they had a Karban oila, right? And so they shechted it. Maybe they burnt it up. They kept it, doesn't matter. But they decided that God will accept their slaughtering of it outside. Maybe it's not even a service thing. The fact, as soon as you shecht it, you already did the shchutei chutz, and therefore you chayiv kares.
Okay, I never until now ever realized that people would shecht animals outside of the place to shecht animals.
Right. Well, this was probably a problem, to get people to come to the Beis Hamikdash. It was probably not easy to bring the Karban. So if it was an idea that you could bring it at home, that would be nice. But again, all this is predicated on the fact is that this animal you could have brought into the Beis Hamikdash. If it's an animal that was not to be brought into the Beis Hamikdash, like the Azazel animal, it's not subject to the laws of shchitei chutz.
Right.
Let's go back. The Gemara says, Amamar, Mishihigra Aleim, when you made that groila, chayiv al Hashem. The animal, the goat that was l'shem Hashem, the chayiv al shchitei chutz, upotar shel azazel. And you potter on the one that's azazel, because that was never supposed to be brought into the Beis Hamikdash. That's supposed to be thrown off the mountain. Taner Rabbanim. Ishish bebeis Yisrael shish l'shar chesav ve'ez b'bachar shish v'nichus b'magam pesach al moed le'avir l'hakrav Karban l'Hashem. That's the pasuk that we discussed. We go on the base. carbon, from the word carbon, I would have shemeani. I would have thought. I feel a kotche bedek kabayish nikru carbon. Can you shnem? I'm not going to carbon shem. I would have thought. You could donate a bicycle. You could donate anything to the base of Mikdash. So if someone donates an animal to the base of Mikdash, that's not a carbon. But sometimes in Chumash it calls it a carbon, but it's not really a carbon because you're not supposed to bring it onto the Mizbeach. But since it's an animal, it's not a bicycle, but you're donating an animal. The idea of donating an animal was to sell the animal and the money would go to the upkeep of the base of Mikdash. So I would have thought that's subject to the laws of Shchitei Chutz. Talmud Loima, the pasuk says, "Well, Pesach oil oy." You have to bring it. It was an animal that was supposed to be slaughtered in the Mishkan, in the base of Mikdash. If it's an animal that was supposed to be slaughtered in the base of Mikdash, then you chayav because of slaughtering it outside. Then I would not be chayav if it's an animal that was never supposed to be slaughtered in the base of Mikdash. Then it's not called shchitei chutz. So I would exclude, let's say, an animal that somebody donated an animal, but the idea was that they should sell the animal and use the monies to upkeep the base of Mikdash. That's not under the umbrella of shchitei chutz. I will not exclude. Skip the word parschatas. The goat that you send off, because at the end of the day, some of the service of this goat that you're going to throw off the mountain was done in the base of Mikdash. What was done in the base of Mikdash? You did the vidoy, you did the lottery. So something was done in the base of Mikdash. Shuhu roy lavel pesach hamed. That walked into the base of Mikdash. I would have thought that would be the Sa'ir HaMashleach would be subject to the laws of Shchutei Chutz. Tamad loyme lashem. All mishim yochid lashem. Something that is slaughtered for Hashem. They're not slaughtered or designated solely for Hashem. They're actually designated to be thrown off the mountain. So the Gemara just asks a side question. So the Hashem excludes what? That excludes the Sa'ir HaMashtaleach. The Hashem excludes the Shayil Mashtaleach. That's not subject of the laws of Shchitei Chutz. Raminu, I'll ask you another question. Here's an interesting thing. A carbon has to be 8 days old to be a carbon. You can't bring a carbon that's 2 days old. The animal has to be 8 days old. What about the Sa'ir HaMashtaleach? Does that also have to be 8 days old? So the Gemara, there's a brisa that says that this animal includes a Sa'ir Shaleach that also has to be 8 days old. Yerotzah lekarban ish Hashem. An 8-day animal is desired by Kadosh Baruch Hu to be brought as a carbon. Elu ishim, if it's brought on the mizbeach, it has to be 8 days old. Talmud loyme carbon, Lashem, carbon. That it has to, now they even make it holy less than 8 days old. If someone takes a 2-day-old animal and say, this is going to be my carbon oila, it doesn't work because it has to be worthy at the time that you're making it holy. It has to be 8 days old. So making it even holy at a 2-day-old is not even going to, the hegdish is not going to come onto it. Lashem, l'rabbe soyer hamishtaleh. Lashem includes the soyer shtaleh that it also has to be 8 days old. So we have so here you say Lashem, right over here you say Lashem is to include the Sari Mishtaleh. And when it comes to Shchitei Chutz, you use the word Lashem to exclude a Sari Mishtaleh. That Shloya Mishtaleh is not under the umbrella of Shchitei Chutz. So is the word LaHashem an additional word that it's marba, or is it an exclusionary word to limit? Rava explained it depends. You just look at the subject matter of the pasuk, and then you could determine how you darshan psukim. Hasam del Pesach l'rabais. The whole Pesach means that the Torah says all animals have to be 8 days old. Okay, so then when you have all animals have to be slaughtered into the Beis Hamikdash. El Pesach means all animals have to be slaughtered in the Beis Hamikdash. So when the Torah says Lashem, it means to limit it, lahoitzi, to exclude only animals that would have been brought on the mizbeach. Those are subject to shchita chutz, not the sa'ir hamishtaleh. Hacha over here, the ishe lahoitzi. The Torah says that only animals that are brought on the mizbeach have to be 8 days old. So, but nothing else. So then I would have thought sa'ir hamishtaleh does not have to be 8 days old. So therefore, lashem l'rabis. The word lashem comes to include, to marba that word. Okay, We're going to do one more piece of the Gemara and then we'll stop because it'll be in the middle of the sugya, but we'll get the sugya. So where we're holding over here, that we just brought in as a side topic that So'ir HaMishtaleach, that goat, even though you're throwing it off the mountain, it could only be Kedusha only if it's 8 days old. And I have a special reboy for that. The Torah says extra words to include a So'ir HaMishtaleach has to be 8 days old. Says the Gemara, Taima de Rabbi Rachmana. It's the only reason why you say a So'ir HaMishtaleach has to be 8 days old. Hoy loy Rabbi, but if the Torah did not tell you that it has to be 8 days old, Havamina, I would have thought, So'ir HaMishtaleach Kodesh b'Mechuas Zman. You can make a So'ir HaMishtaleach if it's not 8 days old. A 2-day-old could have been the So'ir HaMishtaleach. But wait a second. A So'ir HaMishtaleach is always an animal that could have been potentially a regular carbon. It just lost the lottery. But at one point, it could have been the one that won the lottery to be Lashem. And therefore, it would have been a carbon. Gara will not work only if this animal could have won the lottery. So how is it possible to have the So'ir HaMishtaleach less than 8 days old? Amar Rav Yosef says it's a Geshmak Akasha. Hamani Chanan Mitzri. Chanan the Egyptian. There was a Tana called Chanan, and he lived in Egypt. The Tanya we learned it in Braisa. Chanan Mitzri Omer. He says that it's possible to have a So'ir HaMishtaleach without having a lottery. How's that possible? Afiladam bakois. Let's say the blood is in the cup, and the Kohen Gadol's ready to sprinkle the goat's blood in the Beis Hamikdash on the Kodesh Kedoshim, and then what happened was the one that you were supposed to send Lazazel just died outside in the Azara. So then maybe Chaverim Zavikloi. You just bring another goat and just say that will take the place of the old So'ir HaMishtaleach. You don't have to make a new lottery. And that if the Torah didn't tell you, I would have thought that animal could be less than 8 days old because you're not making a lottery on that animal. Kamash Malon, that if you're using it as a So'ir HaMishtaleach, it has to be over 8 days old. So the Gemara says, Chanan Mitzri says that you don't spill out the blood. That means the Kohen Gadol is standing in the Kodesh Kedoshim, ready to sprinkle the goat's blood. Then we tell him, don't spill out that blood. We'll just take don't spill out that blood. We're going to make a new So'ir HaMishtaleach to replace it. But the less le'agar mishamet le, does Chanan Mitzri say you don't make a new goyrel? What maybe Chanan Mitzri will hold that you'll take 2 other goats, make a goyrel. The one that turns out to be the So'ir HaMishtaleach, that will take the place of the So'ir HaMishtaleach that died. The one that turns out to be Hashem, you'll just starve it to death like a chata shemes bala. But even according to Chanan Mitzri, you'd have to make a goyrel. Dilma Maisi, maybe you're going to bring a magrel, make a goyrel. Ella Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says Hamani Rav Shimon that our Mishnah goes according to Rav Shimon. The Tanya we learned in the Braisa, Meis Echad man. If one of the animals died, let's say the So'ir HaMishtaleach died, maybe Chaver Shalei Bagrol. You don't have to make a new lottery. Divrei Rav Shimon. So Rav Shimon is the one that says once you make one lottery, if something went wrong, you could take any animal to take the place of the one animal that died. So therefore, it would have been possible to bring a new So'ir HaMishtaleach without a lottery that would have been less than 8 days old. And because the Torah said Lashem to teach you under all circumstances, the new So'ir HaMishtaleach, no matter what, has to be at least 8 days old. So that's what we learned so far. A new chiddush that first we learned about the So'ir HaMishtaleach are not subject to shchutei chutz. We learned that, but they are subject to the idea of shechting it. The idea of that it has to be at least 8 days old. So it's like a quasi-carbon, the So'ir HaMishtaleach. It has to be 8 days old, but it's not subject to the laws of Shchitei Chutz.
Good.
Okay.
Any
Yes.
thoughts of making this daf that we do the 45 minutes before the early Mincha Ma'ariv rather than after it?
I could do it.
What time?
Well, like
I asked
7.
this week, Mincha is 8:15 by me.
Right. So I'm saying like 7:20, 7:25. That gives you time to do the 45 minutes and 5-minute walk to shul or whatever it may be.
Everybody else has to agree. I mean-
you could PM.
I'm just throwing it out there. I mean,
Right.
Yeah,
If it's okay, then you could PM me if you, and then we'll take a vote. I'm home, I come home about 6:30, so I can do it.
right.
But I don't know
come
how
in
your
closer to
family, if
7.
it's quiet in your house at that time, so who knows? I also want to throw out that perhaps we, as well, is that on Sundays, maybe after the summer, we should at least meet once a week, like on Sundays, do it together in the morning, if it's possible, but we'll talk about that later. And as Hashem, we'll at least meet in 24 days, Mitch Hashem, just for this, just to meet on the day that we finish that last daf.
Okay.
So we do it all together.
Okay,
What's
Unless
after you?
anybody-
What's after Yoma?
I think Rosh Hashanah
Rosh Hashanah.
or
Uh-huh.
Sukkah or something like that.
Someone might want to save the siyum if eating meat on the 9 days.
That I'm doing. So
yeah.
it would just not be a siyum of our meeting together. Would just
Well, we could
finish it.
finish it, right?
Finish
Without
it,
a
yeah.
siyum.
Yeah, I'm saving it for. I never eat. My wife was looking forward that we can at least have a nice meal.
Okay.
Rosh Chodesh is Shabbos, right?
I think it finishes on a Friday or Thursday. Or
Right.
something.
Or
Thursday.
right before
Right
Thursday.
before,
So you
I'm
can
gonna
have a
save it.
big Sunday barbecue.
A Sunday or
Right.
Monday. I was going to save it for the Monday.
Barbecue.
Yeah.
okay.
All right. We should continue
Yeah.
with Siyata Deshmaya to
Amen.
finish it.
Amen.
Good
Amen.
health.
Thank you. Ishkar.
Okay.
Good
Okay.
night.
So PM me if you want to change it. Okay.
Okay.